Hi folks, today we're going to be looking at the 3 basic sewing stitches that you're going to need to get started making Viking Age clothing. We're going to do a running stitch, a back stitch, which is similar to a running stitch but for seams that are going to take a bit more force, and finally a whip stitch or hemming stitch. Once you've got the hang of these 3 stitches, you can make almost any basic Viking Age garment. Let's go and have a look, shall we? Okay, so our first stitch that we're going to learn is running stitch. This straight stitch is the oldest and simplest form of stitching, and the needle passes in and out of the fabric in a straight line. Equal length between the stitches visible on the right and wrong sides, which means the work looks the same on the front and the back of the work. Now, I've drawn a little line here to work to, and I'd recommend when you're starting off that you do as well, because it makes it much easier to keep everything nice and straight as you're working. So you secure your thread, then you're going to come in straight through, use the needle, push through and come backwards, just pull back along the length of the fabric to get a nice small stitch there. So you're going to come through and pull back with each stitch, simple, in and out. Pull back and load your needle up with a few and then pull it through. Caught the little tail there. Now you can see here on this piece, you can pin either using pins or sewing clips. I tend to use sewing clips more often because they're gentler on the fingers, and I do stab myself on a regular basis. However, if you haven't got any, pins are going to work just as well. You can see what I've done here is I've actually pinned straight down. Instead of pinning along the line that I'm going to sew, pin straight down. This is because pinning in this direction will give you less distortion of the fabric as you pin along. And if you're needing to be very precise, this technique will help you. I'm just going to show you here the rough size of these stitches. When you first start, your stitches are probably going to be an awful lot bigger than this. Mine certainly were. I look back at them now and think, oh my goodness, that's ridiculous. This is linen that I'm working on here with linen thread. Linen seams show the most variation in stitch length, but the thread used is usually fine, between 0.4mm and 1mm. And is as closely stitched as you'll see on fine silk garments, with 3 to 5 stitches per centimetre. So this here is about the largest you want your stitches to be if you're working on linen. If you're working on wool, for wool, stitches usually range from about 1 to 3 stitches per centimetre, and the yarns can be a little bit chunkier. But you can use wool or linen thread to sew woolen garments. For linen garments, stick with linen. I'm going to carry on now working this seam until we get to about here, and then I'm going to show you the second stitch. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the second stitch. This first running stitch here, perfectly acceptable for most seams. However, if you need a little bit more strength, then you're going to use a backstitch. What I usually do when I'm doing a running stitch seam is pop a little backstitch in every 5 to 8 stitches or so anyway, just to give the seam a little bit more strength. I'll show you here now how this one works. Now, as you can see with this stitch, it's exactly the same on the front and the back. Backstitch is somewhat different, so it will matter which side of the work you're working on if you want it to look neat at the end. It's not actually going to make any difference to the strength of the seam. So instead of going on to our next stitch here, we're going to backstitch into the stitch we've just done. So you come up there, you're going to pop your needle in just at the end of that last stitch there. Make another stitch that comes out about the same distance away. So the spacing is similar, but you're looping back on yourself here. With each stitch, just come in at the end of the last one. What you will end up with is a nice neat row of stitching that looks like a single defined line on one side, but on the back you'll see the looping effect, and I'll show you that in a moment when we've done a little bit more. So you can see there the difference between the two types of stitching. When we flip over to the back, you can see that that's slightly more lumpy as the loops come over each other. But this will give it additional strength. If I open the seam up here, you can see there's quite a lot more give with that stitch than there is with this one. As you can see, it does take a little bit longer to work things up in backstitch. And a lot of the time, it's not actually necessary for some of the seams that won't be taking a great deal of force. However, for things like, for example, the side seams on your tunics and dresses, the little bits between the shoulder gussets and the gauze at the bottom, for some reason, this is where my children pop their seams most often. So I backstitch these now, and it has seemed to solve that problem. It really does add extra strength in areas that are going to take a lot of force. So things like also with trousers, around the crotch area, especially for the warriors. Very, very handy to know this stitch. I've got examples from Hedeby, Viborg in Denmark, and it's probably also used at Oseberg in Norway, Birka in Sweden. Both of these stitches are pretty ubiquitous in the Viking Age, used primarily for the same sorts of things, but one slightly stronger than the other. What you also may want to do is double up your thread for seams that are under a lot of stress. Now when you get to the end of your run of stitching, you're going to want to secure it well. So what I do is I make a very small back stitch there. Simple knot. Then I come back a little way into the seam, and I'll do the same again. Now with this seam here. There's a definite right and a wrong side. We're going to need to do something to deal with these easily frayable edges in a moment, and that's the last stitch that I'm going to show you. So for now, let's have a quick look over here. You can see this is the rear side of our work. Usually you'd be using a thread that wasn't quite so obvious, but I'm using the bright red here just to show you clearly what the stitches look like. So this is our back side. So to finish off, I'm just going to take my thread through to the back of the work, and then I'm just going to weave between these stitches to hold my little endy bit nice and flat. You can just leave these dangling, but I like to do this to keep it neat. In a moment, all this is going to be hidden with the final stitch that I'm going to show you, which is a staple for Viking Age seams. For now, I'm just going to pop this in here, keep it nice and tidy. Now the third and final stitch that I'm going to show you in this basics video is called hem stitch or whip stitch. I tend to call it whip stitch because I like it. I don't know why I like that name, but I do. But if you see hemming stitch mentioned or whip stitch, this is generally what is going to be being referred to. And with this third and final stitch, you would have learnt the stitches that can help you make almost any Viking Age garment that you desire. Now, this is the wrong side of our work. You can see there where the back stitch is lumpy as opposed to the front side. If you're working in back stitch, generally you should decide which side is going to be covered before you start. But if you haven't, it's not a big problem. Now, this linen edge here will fray terribly. If you're using wool, you can sometimes just get away with folding it down and whip stitching along this edge, because wool doesn't fray as much as linen will do. So you won't always need to do this next foldy bit. But for linen, almost any seam that you're going to be whip stitching, you're going to need to roll the hem underneath to flat fellet. To fellet rather, not flat fellet. Now, once you've got it where you want it, you can pin it, or you can just work with your fingers, it's up to you. In this example, I'm just going to show you quickly. So we're going to secure our thread to begin. I'm just securing this thread now with a simple knot to begin with. Now, some people work this that way, some people work it that way. You're going to find whatever method works best for you. This is what's most comfortable for my hands as a right-handed sewer. Now, the aim of this stitch is to enclose the edge and flatten it down. So we're going to come in, grab just a few threads of our base fabric here, bring it up at an angle through our top piece. And then we want to lay the thread over this edge, back down into the base fabric. So we catch our base fabric, we come up through the top part, we pull that diagonal thread down, which holds this piece flat and binds it to the piece underneath. If you're doing this on wool and you haven't folded the edge under like this, you may want to come in a little bit further with each stitch to bind that down and make sure you don't get any fraying. Now because here I'm working on linen, trying to keep my stitches at least a minimum of 3 to a centimetre. If you can get them even closer, absolutely brilliant. Now the reason why small stitching is stronger, if you think about it, is that over each particular given area of fabric, any force put on that fabric has got to be shared between the stitches. The more stitches there are, the stronger your seam is going to be. If I turn it over here, you can see there's just tiny little stitches showing on the other side, and in a closely matching thread you'd barely even see those. So we're reaching the end of our line of stitching now. I'm just going to show you how I finish off the ends, keep all the threads under control and neat and tidy. So we come up to our last running stitch. Just going to take it back through itself there, form our first knot. And what I do is I just come slightly back. I go through just the felled seam there, not the front of the work. Pop in another little knot, and then I take my needle, come inside here, so that we're going to hide all of the thread inside that rolled seam there, that felled seam. Tighten it a little bit so that when you snip, it disappears back inside the work. I've done exactly the same on this end with these troublesome little threads here that were getting in my way earlier. So now what we have are the 3 stitches that you're going to need to get started with Viking Age sewing. Your running stitch, your back stitch and your whip stitch for your hemming. If you can master these 3, you can make almost anything. There's a few more stitches that we have evidence for in the Viking Age. They're a bit more advanced. I'll do another video on those later on. But for now, these are the 3 stitches that you need to get the hang of. Find a bit of linen or wool, practice. I promise you'll get better quite quickly. And you'll look back on your first attempt and go, ooh, that was a bit rubbish. But like anything else, practice makes perfect. Or at least a little bit better than you were when you started. So if I turn this over here, you can see what this seam looks like on the right side. Now obviously, with matching thread, those stitches will be hardly visible at all. I'm just going to show you now what that looks like on the garment I'm currently wearing. See on the cuff here, that's whip stitches there holding that cuff part down. And you can see there on that sleeve hem just how teeny tiny those whip stitches can be. On the outside of the cuff here, you can see the running stitch seam and the turn seam with the whip stitches, almost invisible. And here on the bottom hem, where one of the side gauze is attached, on the inside there you can see the little tiny whip stitches and the running stitches there. Dead simple, see? Not as scary as you first thought. Now with these 3 basic stitches you can make almost any item of Viking Age clothing. There are some more advanced stitches which I'll show you in another video, but for now get the hang of these ones and you're ready to get started. If you've got any questions, pop them in the comments or come and find me on Facebook. Have a wonderful day everybody and happy sewing. Bye! Now, is there anything else I need to say in that outro?
Subscribe.
I'm not going to ask people to subscribe, they'll subscribe if they like my stuff, sweetheart.